Blog Talk Radio.
Here we are, ladies and gentlemen. Number 3 and number 4 will come up here, at the 9 o'clock hour back east from Pittsburgh. So we'll have that one, the 412 with Joe Cuckless. But this is the one that's taking center stage now, and it takes center stage in the slot every Tuesday out of Cleveland, Ohio. The American Sports History Podcast, hosted by a brother, a mentor, and a friend to me, Peter Ray. 2,500 miles to the west of him. Yours truly, Mark Mancini, producing it. 347-205-9631 if you happen to miss it, which goes by quick. Catch the archive version, blogtalkradio.com/Mancini Sports Podcast platforms, wherever you subscribe to Podcast Power now by Mancini Media. So as I lay that red carpet down, put that podium in its place, hand off the mic, it's more of him, less than me. The Threes, Peter. How are you? How can people get a hold of you? And this guy comes in just as much as your other guy comes in. He's got the monthly pass, so I'll sit back and man the boards and let you two go at it for 30.
Yeah. Hi, Mark. I'm doing well. I have a YouTube channel. It's my name, Peter, J.R.E.A. You're absolutely right. Tonight's guest, once a month, tremendous sports book author. He's written 4. Bench Bosses, the NHL's Coaching Elite 2015, The Art of the Dealers, the NHL's Greatest General Managers 2017, Lords of the Gridiron, College Football's Greatest Coaches 2019, and the book that we're continuing to go through once a month, Lords of the Gridiron 2, Pro Football's Greatest Coaches 2022. Welcome to the show, Mr. Matthew DiBiase.
Peter, Mark, it's so great to be back again, man. It's always a thrill.
Yeah, it's another once a month we get a tremendous night, a half an hour of NFL history, and we're going through the top 50 greatest coaches of all time from your book. And tonight we'll start off with Mike McCarthy. What do you have to say about Mike McCarthy?
When I was working on my last book, I was surprised at how high Mike McCarthy ranked. I mean, that was a bit of a surprise for me, but after doing all my calculations, I made the following discoveries. One, he was the 3rd greatest coach in the NFL of the 2010s, behind Bill Belichick and Pete Carroll. He managed to lead the Green Bay Packers to 6 division titles, which is the same number that Vince Lombardi had during his reign, and he won more divisional titles than Mike Holmgren or Mike Sherman did. And of the 10 greatest regular season performances in Packers history, McCarthy coached 3 of them. And no other Packers coach has more than that. And in his 2011 season where Green Bay went 15-1, it's still the Packers franchise record. I mean, he's the greatest. He's still the greatest Packers coach in terms of regular season win and regular season winning percentage. Second only to Curly Lambeau in games coached and in regular season games won and lost. And he leads all Packers coaches in postseason games coached and playoff games won. And and also he oversaw the transition from Brett Favre to the Aaron Rodgers era. Now Rodgers is with the Jets. I mean, it really surprised me. I mean, of course, he has coached the Packers' last Super Bowl winner. The thing about McCarthy is great performance, yes, but he could have been a lot more. 3 times he led the Packers to NFC conference title games, only to lose in 2007, 2014, and 2016. And those 3 losses really hurt him in 4 of my 6 categories. Career value, average season rating, the best 5 consecutive seasons, best 5 seasons, and playoff value. That's 5 categories right there. I mean, if he had gotten those extra Super Bowl appearances and maybe won a couple more rings, he would have been higher than the 22nd position rank that I put him in. I like Bill Cowher. He was born in the greater Pittsburgh area. Actually, he and I are contemporaries. He was born in '63, and that's the same year I was born. And grew up in a very blue-collar atmosphere, kind of like Chuck Knox, the late Chuck Knox, who we'll discuss for months from now, down the road, because he came from the greater Pittsburgh area as well. Kind of a grim childhood, just very blue-collar, hard-working, not very comfortable and all of that. And he just he had a great coach in high school. You know, he played football and basketball, and his basketball coach was really influential with him. You know, very hard-nosed, but just, you know, a lot of intensity, and McCarthy kind of imitated that. Didn't really play football in a notable school. He was playing community college in Arizona, then was playing, then played at Baker in Kansas. Nothing really spectacular. Basically, it was just he wanted to get into coaching right away. I mean, thing was he was having trouble finding a niche. I mean, nothing really fancy, and out of desperation, he actually contacted Pitt University, asked for a job. At first, they had nothing, and then the very next day, the phone call says, "Hey, all of a sudden we got a vacancy. You want the internship?" Bing, bang, boom, bow. He got it, graduate assistant. At least he got his foot in the door, and he just started working. You know, just doing all the assistant coaching stuff. Spent 4 years at Pitt. And while he was at Pitt, he worked for Paul Hackett, and they always talk about coaching trees. I would, even though he later coached under Marty Schottenheimer, I would put him more under the Bill Walsh coaching tree because his biggest mentor was Paul Hackett, and Hackett was a Bill Walsh disciple. And Hackett was very much into the West Coast offense, and McCarthy absorbed all of that West Coast offense indoctrination there. And then finally, he got a job with the Chiefs, and he was working as a quality control assistant. And then he later became, offensive coordinator, and Paul Hackett later became offensive coordinator with the Chiefs. So again, McCarthy was exposed, to the West Coast offense. He was interacting with Joe Montana, and just he was learning so much. And then finally, he got a big break when the Packers. He did like a season as a quarterbacks coach with the Packers. After Holmgren left, Ray Rhodes took over as head coach of Green Bay. And he spent one season working with Brett Favre and actually made a good impression with Favre. I mean, Favre liked him. And, he really worked at it. And he was really, working at it. And when I interviewed like an old Chiefs guy, Tim Grunard, who played for the Chiefs under Schottenheimer, and he actually sang McCarthy's praises. He said McCarthy had one of those great offensive minds. He could look at the X and O's. He had that knack of being able to see things that other people couldn't see and be able to decipher, the various formations and plays against different, defensive schemes. And he was really good at dictating the action of the defense and knowing how to counteract the defense and all of that. And now, he only did one season at Green Bay, and then after Ray Rhodes got fired at Green Bay, McCarthy kind of scuttled around a bit, just basically doing assistant coaching work. He was working in New Orleans. He was working with the 49ers. And then finally, in 2006, he applied for the Packers job. Actually, he went up against Sean Payton. Those were the two. They were going after it, hammer and tongs, and finally it was McCarthy who got the nod over Sean Payton. And, of course, Sean Payton went to New Orleans in even greater glory and all that. And basically, what he did was he went through the end of the Brett Favre era and then the beginning of the Aaron Rodgers era there. Green Bay was they kind of were playing so-so football, and then finally, Favre left in 2008, and finally it became Aaron Rodgers'. He was the starting quarterback. It was his. And, he brought up Aaron Rodgers very slowly. First, he was just letting Rodgers do basic short yardage passing and all of that, and Rodgers was responding. He was doing good in the preseason, and then finally he just took off, and they were getting playoff spots, and then finally in 2010 they put it all together. They went all the way to the Super Bowl there, and it was basically. You could say it's like Green Bay's last hurrah because they haven't been to the Super Bowl since. It was just total confidence. You had Dom Capers, leading the defense there, getting great work out of it. He had a great secondary, Charles Woodson, Tremont Williams, Nick Collins. The defense was responding, and then they took on the Steelers and they managed to beat them. They're very relaxed. They didn't do any extra pressure, handled it very nicely and all that. And then and they won it all. And the thing is, though, they won it all. And he and Rodgers won it all so very soon and so very quickly. And then after that, it was kind of all downhill again. Though when you look at their regular season record, I mean, they were winning division titles, they were getting into the playoffs, they made it into the NFC Conference Finals, but they couldn't get back to the Super Bowl. And just slowly but surely, you start seeing cracks in the beautiful statue there, and you could see the little petty resentments building up between McCarthy and Rodgers. I mean, in a sense, you could say winning that Super Bowl kind of brought out the worst in both of them. And I think Rodgers, I mean, now you see all this kind of his little odd behaviors and all that. Is it like what was it? Basketball legend Pat Riley talked about the disease of more. Winning can sometimes bring out the worst in you, and one wonders if that's what happened between McCarthy and Rodgers. I mean, because the relationship became poisonous between the two, and also the fact that Green Bay wasn't getting back into the Super Bowl. In a sense, the players beginning to wonder, what the heck is going on there. They're beginning to doubt, and that's a fatal thing when you start doubting the man who took you there in the first place. And then finally, by 2018, they had a losing season in 2017, and then they started off real badly in 2018, 4-7-1, and Green Bay fired McCarthy, and he sat out a year, and then he's with Dallas, and it's been kind of seesaw, with Dallas. First he had a 6-10 season, during the COVID-19 season. Then he had a winning season, in 2021, but then. But the fact is, he still couldn't get into the Super Bowl. And now, after the end of this past season here, even though they had a winning season, Jerry Jones has fired off all his assistant coaches, and it's pretty obvious Mike McCarthy's head is in a guillotine. And it would not, I'll tell you, Peter, it would not surprise me if Dallas stumbles going out of the gate this coming season. Wouldn't surprise me if McCarthy gets the chop even before the season ends. Wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. I mean, basically his head's in that guillotine. He's walking the razor's edge, and if he can't get them all the way, I think he's gone. Now, the thing is, will that be the end of his coaching career? I don't know, but he'll be 60. He'll be 60 years old. Who knows whether he's got a future or not? But it's basically that's with Mike McCarthy. I mean, a very decent effort, but in some ways he could have been a lot more.
You wrote in your book, monuments and statues need to be cleaned and maintained on a regular basis, lest their beauty fades away from the elements or abuse or neglect. The tarnishing and eroding of the Packers' monument of success and glory in 2010 began immediately, slowly, and inexorably. Now let's move on to Bud Grant. When my book came out, I got some stick from some people who thought I underrated Bud Grant because I have him ranked 23rd. And my answer is this: he lost 4 Super Bowls. That's a lot. And if he had won, 1, 2, maybe more of those Super Bowls, he would have ranked higher because you see, the 22 guys who are ranked ahead of him, they all won Super Bowls or NFL championships during the pre-Super Bowl era. They won. And that's what my system is. If you win a championship, that really elevates you. It rewards those who win the championship because that's the ultimate test. And Grant, even though in regular season performance he was glorious, magnificent, one of the finest coaches from 69 to 77, when it came to the Super Bowl, it was like Cinderella. The clock would strike midnight and the Vikings would become pumpkins again. It was kind of sad in a way, I mean, they lost to the Chiefs in Super Bowl 4. They lost to the Miami Dolphins in Super Bowl 8. Then they lost again to the Steelers in Super Bowl 9. Then they lost again, for the Raiders, in Super Bowl 11. And each loss was a larger margin than the one before that. It's kind of sad in a way. It's kind of like Marv Levy in a way, just never the luck. I mean, it's almost, I hate to say tragic, but it was kind of sad, but an amazing coach in many ways. I mean, he took over in 1967. He became the head coach of the Minnesota Vikings. And the reason why he got that Vikings job was that he was one of the greatest coaches in the history of the Canadian Football League. I mean, talk about his beginnings.
he played at the University of Minnesota, and he learned football at the knee of Bernie Bierman, late Bernie Bierman, who was featured in my third book, Lords of the Gridiron, College Football's Greatest Coaches. He was one of the greatest coaches of all time at the University of Minnesota. He won like 5 national championships from 35 to 1941. And in many ways, he was a lot like Bud Grant. We always remember Bud Grant, silver-haired, unemotional, silver-haired, blue-eyed, just taciturn and unemotional. Bierman was like that, and Grant was like that too. Inert to the cold, just very calm, fiercely disciplined. His teams were fiercely disciplined. Nothing fancy. It was always trench warfare, and they always knew how to win by attrition in those trenches there. And Bud Grant was the same way. And he played for the Eagles. And here's another interesting fact. He was also a top-notch basketball player. He actually played in the NBA for the Minneapolis Lakers. When the Lakers, before they were Los Angeles Lakers, they played at Minneapolis, Minnesota, and were a bloody great team. They were one of the earliest dynasties in the pre-shot clock era in the NBA, from 46 to 54. And he actually played on like 1 or 2 of their title winners for the late John Cunliffe. He was a heck of a basketball player. But he also was a football player, too, and he played for the Eagles, and he was actually one of the first NFL football players to jump from the NFL to the Canadian Football League, because there was like a semi-rivalry in the early 50s where the Canadian Football League was luring players like Eddie LeBaron, Alex Webster to the Canadian Football League, and Bud Grant was one of those guys who made the jump. And he was actually quite a star for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. He was an offensive end. And he set team records. He set records like in pass receptions and like interceptions for his offensive and defensive play. And then 1956, they asked him to become their head coach, and he agreed to do so. And it's during those years in the Canadian Football League he began developing his methods there. And he led Winnipeg to 5 Grey Cups, which is the Canadian Football League equivalent of winning the Super Bowl. And he won 4 of them. So he won championships in the Canadian Football League. Actually, that's the thing. No one has ever done that. I don't think anyone's ever won. No one has ever won a Grey Cup and a Super Bowl. It's never happened. They've had coaches like Marv Levy. He coached a Grey Cup appearance, but he never won a Super Bowl. So it's something that still hasn't happened yet. But he was legendary, and he made the most of his talents there. Learned what his players could do, and then based his offenses and defenses on what his players were capable of doing, and he just kept them motivated and kept them in shape. But he was always low-key. He was disciplined, but he was not a yeller and a screamer. It was just a very quiet, firm strength. And that's one thing his players loved him for. You were accountable. If you got that cold stare from him, that means you screwed up, and you didn't want to get that cold stare from him. You didn't want to let him down. You never wanted to let him down. You always wanted to come through for him in the worst way. And kind of interestingly, unlike Vince Lombardi, he didn't work you to death in practice. He always kept his practices very brief and short. That's one reason why his teams always played well in December, because they weren't really exhausted. He wanted to conserve their strength for the end of season run and in the playoffs, with the exception of the Super Bowl, of course. So that's why when the weather got cold in Minnesota, when he coached in Minnesota, that's when the Vikings really were toughest, because he developed that aura of being able to withstand the cold, no heaters, on the sidelines there. There's that famous remark in the '69 playoffs against the Cleveland Browns: "Why don't you have any heaters?" He said, "We create our own heat," and it was part of that mystique there. And it was part of that glamour from '69 to '77 when the Vikings dominated the NFC and all that, winning all those division titles and making those 4 Super Bowl appearances. Other teams would go into Minnesota in December and January and they'd be dying. Like the Rams. Most of the time they were taking on the Rams. I remember watching this as a kid. They'd go in there and they're just dying of the cold, and the Vikings, they would just do the basics. Kill them with fundamentals. Use their special teams, make a big play here, a key interception, a key sack, a key fumble or recovery. Or heck, I remember one game, was it 74 or 75? They beat the Rams in the NFC Conference Championship game. Tom Dempsey tried to do a kicking from the Vikings too. One of the Vikings blocked the field goal attempt. The Viking recovered it, ran it all the way for a touchdown. It was a game breaker. I mean, it was just incredible. It was so special. Just making the big plays on defense. And go ahead.
Yeah, you wrote in your in my notes I've got you talked about how he played football in the Navy, the Great Lakes Naval Training Station under Paul Brown, Weeb Eubank, and Blanton Collier.
Yeah.
Now I remember Bud Grant from the 70s, and that stoic guy, since he got the team to the Super Bowl, and so and these memorable players: Alan Page, Carl Eller, Fran Tarkenton, Chuck Foreman, Ahmad Rashad. Now, in your book, you wrote about how he's this Nordic, blue-eyed look, stoic, mid-wern taciturnity, unemotional. And then you quoted him. He said, "It might be hard to believe, but I never developed a true coaching philosophy. I can say that learning from others what not to do coaching helped me more than anything else. I saw it over the course of my playing career, coaches trying to put their systems in place rather than developing systems suited for the players on their rosters. I have always felt that it is important to work out a system for the talent that you have on the team. I've always coached that way, and many other coaches never understood that. I felt that I could judge talent successfully. I knew what a football player was. I believe that what you are is not a coach, frankly, but an evaluator of talent. There is always a certain amount of organization necessary, but the bottom line, if you're going to be successful, is that you better be able to evaluate players." And then you've got, Gary Larson talked about, you quoted him, one of his players. "Bud Grant reminded me of the discipline we had in the Marines. He treated everybody the same. If you were 5 minutes early to a meeting, then you were 10 minutes late, that sort of thing. Bud was a disciplinarian. Everybody had to get their hair cut and their sideburns clipped, no hair below the earlobe or lower than your collar. He had a lot of disciplinarian actions that people in pro football had not been aware of. I think it was a very positive influence from the get-go. The departure of Fran Tarkenton left a vacancy at the quarterback position. Jim Finks brought in a feisty field general of German, Mexican, American heritage named Joe Kapp. Kapp was a late 1960s version of Bobby Lane. He was paunchy and threw wobbly passes, but all he did was win football games. He quoted Gary Larson, teammate. "Joe was a hell of a football player. He was tough as they come. He would rather run over you than around you, and he inspired the offense. He was a quarterback who would lead the offense with blood coming out of his mouth and his nose, which you don't see too much with quarterbacks, and he was a leader. He stood in there and took the punishment when he had to, and he was something else."
Yeah.
You talked about they didn't have heaters. You wrote, "I don't know if this in this day and age, if anyone would go along with that, and at the time it didn't seem like the smart thing to do when you're freezing, especially the guys who weren't playing, but that was Bud's mentality, that you adjust to the cold and you adapt to it, and mentally you should just ignore it." Fran Tarkenton said this about Bud Grant. "What he did in managing the Vikings was give people the freedom to excel with their abilities. He knew how to manage people, and he managed them in a way to allow them to succeed. He did it his way. He is a part of all that I do. He was the best football coach, the best teacher, the best manager of the game, the best manager of people, and the smartest person I have known." And then you talked about Fran Tarkenton. "He seemed like he had eyes in the back of his head, and he drove offensive linemen crazy. With his ability to avoid being sacked and scrambling, he could get good yardage. Very bright individual and a great field general. He was fully in charge." You were quoting, who was that? Jeff Seaman. "I wish we could have gotten a Super Bowl victory for him, but he took the Vikings a long way." And another quote by, "When I first came into the National Football League, I noticed teams didn't," this is Bud Grant, "I didn't notice teams didn't pay much attention to blocking kicks. They would put 6 men on the line of scrimmage and the other 5 would watch. I wondered why, especially on extra points. I mean, the opposing team isn't going to fake the kick. First, the other team needs someone to hold the ball and someone to kick it. So you have 11 men trying to block that kick and only 9 protecting for it. You have an edge if all 11 players charge with intensity. That's the key. No one man is responsible for making the block. All 11 have a shot at doing that. The man who gets it is the man the opposing team doesn't handle." And you talked about how Alan Page blocked 25 extra point kicks. Matt Blair blocked 20 punts in his career. Carl Eller blocked 10 kicks.
Yeah.
Now, interesting thing you said that Bud Grant lives in his home outside of Minneapolis, and once a year he invites the public to visit for his annual garage yard sale.
Yeah, but we lost him a few months ago, though. He passed on.
Oh, he's gone.
Yeah,
Okay,
we lost him some months ago and all that. Thing about Grant was he and George Allen were among the first to really emphasize special teams as a true equal unit with offense and defense, whereas before, special teams was where you put your cast-off players, your bench warmers. That was the only time they ever got into a game. No. Like you read from that quotation, Bud Grant saw the opportunity. Here's a chance to make a play. If you can block a field goal attempt, if you can block an extra point, you can steal points there and make a difference. If you can block punts. And that's where he created that type of specialization. I remember as a kid, there was a Football Digest article that basically articulates what's in the book there. You know, the specialists, skimmers, blockers, each man had a role, in special teams when it came to blocking kicks, either field goals or extra points or punts. And he created those concepts there. I mean, he created that specialization. He and Marv Levy and George Allen were the most radical innovators in terms of elevating special teams play into a genuine art form and in a true equal squad on par with your conventional offensive and defensive units. And that is one of his greatest legacies to NFL tactics and all of that. Getting back to his Super Bowl losses, we were talking before the show, Gary Lawson always talked, because he was there for the first three Super Bowl losses, it was always a question of size. Yes, the Minnesota Vikings had the Purple People Eaters, but actually in terms of physical size, and I checked this out, and it's true, they were actually on the small side. They were not behemoths like we get used to today. I mean, like against the Chiefs in Super Bowl IV, the Chiefs' offensive line was much larger than the Purple People Eaters, and their offensive line was able to contain, Page and Eller and Larson and Jim Marshall. And also on offense, the Kansas City Chiefs defensive line was massively outweighed the Vikings offensive line and was able to contain the Vikings offense significantly. They sealed off their inside running game by putting Buck Buchanan over Mick Tingelhoff as a nose tackle. And the same thing went for the Miami Dolphins in Super Bowl VIII. I mean, the Dolphins' offensive line was much larger than the Purple People Eaters, and all game long they were eating holes into them, just punching holes. And Larry Zonka set a Super Bowl record for rushing yardage in a single game. Now, and then in Super Bowl IX with the Pittsburgh Steelers, which they lost 16-6, a key problem was that the Vikings' offense was just way too conservative and way too predictable. I mean, Andy Russell talked about it. He said, we just knew what they were going to do because they just knew, okay, here it comes, a certain situation, they're going to use this type of play, and sure enough, it would come. They never really adjusted, and you could contain their offense. If you just knew what was coming, you could contain them. That's how the Chiefs did it in Super Bowl IV, the Dolphins did it in Super Bowl VIII, and, the Steelers did it in Super Bowl IX. And then again in Super Bowl XI, the Raiders' offensive line, of course, was one of the largest in NFL history, and you had Upshaw and Shell, two behemoths on that left side, and they just kept punching holes in the Vikings, kept punching holes. I mean, Minnesota never had a chance. They had 1 moment of glory. That's when they blocked Ray Guy's punt. And the thing is, and they fumbled on the very next play. I mean, something was always missing. And that's that's the sad part about the Vikings from 69 to 77. That's one of the reasons why they fell short in Super Bowl competition. And sadly, after that, they've never been to the Super Bowl ever since.
Lance from Pensacola, Florida, loves the show, says that he thinks Mike McCarthy is just average. Joe from Bucks County, Pennsylvania, is at the Orioles-Phillies game listening to this show. He likes Dan. He liked Dan Devine in Green Bay. Barry from McKeesport, Pennsylvania, thinks Bill Cowher was a great coach, and he says keep up the great work. We've run out of time. Matthew, do you have any final words for our audience?
Yes, my book, Lords of the Gridiron 2, Pro Football's Greatest Coaches, is up on Amazon. Type in my name, Matthew DiBiase, D-I-B-I-A-S-E, and there it is. And pretty soon, on September 1st, they'll be on sale at 30% off. So just wait for the NFL season to start, and you'll get it on sale, and it'll remain on sale until after the Super Bowl is played in next February.
Well, another wonderful show on NFL history. Thanks so much. And I'm really looking forward to your book on baseball's greatest managers coming out in 3 years.
Yes.
So thanks so much for another wonderful show in NFL history, Matthew DiBiase.
Peter, it's always an honor and privilege to be on your show. God bless you, man.
God bless you. Keep up the good work. Wonderful. We'll have Matthew back in 4 weeks. We'll talk about Blanton Collier and the Cleveland Browns in the 60s, and Sean Payton, New Orleans Saints from 06 to 21. Next week we're going to have Bill North, who was the honorary coach for the American League All-Star team, and one of the greatest players of the 1970s, tremendous defensive center fielder and base stealer. In 2 weeks, we're going to have Larry Sorensen, who played Major League pitcher from 1977 to 1988. Dear listener, may the road rise to meet you. May the wind be at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face and rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. Good night, everybody. Thanks again so much, Mr. Matthew DiBiase.
God bless you, Peter. Amen.
God bless you.
Right.